The conference room was silent except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Commander Vex Theron stood at the large window, his scaled hands clasped behind his back. He stared at the debris field floating in the darkness of space. Broken ships, twisted metal, and the remains of what was once the pride of the Zetharian Empire drifted slowly past the station. 3 years. That was how long the war had lasted. 3 years that had brought the mighty Zetharian Empire to its knees. Vex Theron still could not understand how it happened. His people had ruled over 40 star systems. They had conquered dozens of species. Their military was the most powerful force in the galaxy. And yet they had been defeated by humans. The door behind him opened with a soft hiss. Vex Theron did not turn around. He knew who was entering. The humans had arrived for the meeting. Admiral Jacob Hayes walked into the room first. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. Behind him came 2 others, a woman with dark hair tied back in a tight bun, and an older man carrying a data pad. They moved quietly, their footsteps barely making a sound on the metal floor. Jacob stopped a few feet from Vex Theron. He waited for the alien commander to acknowledge him. The silence stretched between them like a gulf neither wanted to cross first. Finally, Vex Theron turned. His yellow eyes met Jacob's brown ones. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Admiral Hayes," Vex Theron said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel being crushed. "I am here as requested." "Thank you for coming, Commander," Jacob replied. His voice was calm and even. "Please sit." They moved to the large table in the center of the room. Vex Theron sat on one side. Jacob, the woman, and the older man sat on the other. The table was empty except for a small holographic projector in the center. "This is Lisa Brennan," Jacob said, gesturing to the woman. "She is our tactical analyst. And this is Dr. Paul Martinez. He studies military history." Vex Theron nodded slowly. He did not offer greetings to the other 2 humans. His eyes remained fixed on Jacob. "I have come to sign your treaty," Vex Theron said. "The Council of Elders has agreed to your terms. We will withdraw from all disputed territories. We will pay the reparations you demanded. We will dismantle our forward military bases." "Good," Jacob said simply. "But I have one question," Vex Theron continued. His voice grew harder, sharper. "One question that burns in my mind every day and every night since our defeat." Jacob leaned back in his chair. He seemed to know what was coming. "How?" Vex Theron asked. The word came out like a curse. "How did you defeat us?" "We had more ships. We had better weapons. We had 1,000 years of military tradition. You were barely spacefaring when we first encountered you. Your technology was primitive. Your fleets were small. By every calculation, every tactical analysis, every strategic model, we should have crushed you within months." He slammed his fist on the table. The sound echoed through the quiet room. "What secret weapon did you use? What technology did you hide from us? What advantage did you possess that our intelligence never discovered?" Jacob remained calm. He exchanged a glance with Lisa, then with Paul. Then he looked back at Vex Theron. "We did not have a secret weapon," Jacob said quietly. Vex Theron's eyes narrowed. "You lie." "I do not lie," Jacob replied. "We won this war, Commander. But not because we had better ships or better guns. We won because we understood something that your empire never could." "What?" Vex Theron demanded. "What could you possibly understand that we do not?" Jacob stood up slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at the debris field. Vex Theron watched him, confused and angry. "Before I answer that question," Jacob said, "I need to ask you something. When you look at that wreckage out there, what do you see?" Vex Theron stood and joined him at the window. "I see the death of my people's pride. I see the end of our dominance. I see failure." "That is what you see," Jacob said. He pointed to a piece of twisted metal floating past. "That piece right there came from one of our ships. The destroyer called Liberty. It was destroyed in the final battle. 300 crew members died when it exploded." He pointed to another piece. "That came from your flagship, the Wrath of Zethara. Over 2,000 of your people died there." Vex Theron's jaw tightened. "Why do you tell me this?" "Because I want you to understand something," Jacob said. He turned to face the alien commander. "When I look at that debris field, I do not see victory. I see cost. I see sacrifice. I see people who will never go home to their families. And that is the first difference between your people and mine." Vex Theron stared at him. "I do not understand." "I know," Jacob said. "That is why you lost. Vexatheron's anger flared. His hand moved toward the weapon at his side. But he stopped himself. He remembered where he was. He remembered why he was here. He forced himself to be calm. "Explain," he said through clenched teeth. "Explain how we lost to a species that should have been easy to conquer. Explain why my empire lies in ruins while your people celebrate victory. Explain, or I will walk out of this room right now and your treaty can burn in the void of space." Jacob nodded slowly. "All right. I will explain. But I warn you, Commander, the truth may be harder to accept than any military defeat. The answer you seek is not about weapons or tactics. It is about who we are. It is about what makes us human." He returned to his seat. Lisa activated the holographic projector. Images began to appear above the table. Pictures of Earth, pictures of human history, pictures of war and peace, of destruction and rebuilding, of death and survival. "Sit down, Commander," Jacob said. "This will take some time. But when we are finished, you will understand why you lost. And more importantly, you will understand why you could never have won." Vextheron stood at the window for a moment longer. Part of him wanted to leave. Part of him wanted to refuse to hear whatever these humans had to say. But a larger part of him needed to know, needed to understand. So he returned to his seat. "Tell me," he said quietly. And so Jacob began to speak. He began to tell the story of humanity. The story of a species that had learned to survive against impossible odds. The story of a people who understood the true cost of war. The story that would shake the foundations of the galaxy itself. Outside the window, the debris continued to drift through the darkness of space. Silent witnesses to a truth that was about to be revealed. Lisa Brennan touched the holographic controls. The images above the table shifted and changed. Now they showed a blue and green planet spinning slowly in space. "Earth. This is where we come from," Lisa said. Her voice was clear and professional. "Before we talk about the war, you need to understand this world. You need to understand what shaped us." Vexatheron looked at the planet with little interest. "I have seen your homeworld in our files. It is a standard Class M planet. Water, oxygen atmosphere, moderate temperatures. Nothing special. On the surface, yes," Lisa agreed. "But look closer." The image zoomed in. It showed oceans with massive storms, mountains reaching high into thin air, deserts where nothing could live, frozen wastelands at the poles, jungles thick with dangerous plants and animals. "Earth is not a kind planet," Lisa explained. "It has tried to kill us since the day our species was born. Ice ages that froze entire continents, volcanoes that blocked out the sun for years, earthquakes that swallowed cities, diseases that killed millions, predators that hunted us when we were weak. Many species face such challenges," Vextheron said. "This is not unique." "You are right," Paul Martinez spoke up. He was an older man with gray in his beard. "But here is what makes us different. We were not the strongest species on our planet. We were not the fastest. We did not have claws or sharp teeth. We had no armor, no venom, no natural weapons at all." He brought up new images. They showed early humans, primitive people with simple tools. "We survived by being smart, by working together, by never giving up no matter how hard things became. We learned to make tools. We learned to use fire. We learned to hunt animals much bigger and stronger than us, not by being better than them, but by being more persistent." Vexatheron listened but seemed unconvinced. "This is ancient history. What does it have to do with our war?" "Everything," Jacob said. He stood and walked around the table. "Commander, when your people attacked Earth, what did you expect to happen?" "We expected your military to fight back," Vexatheron replied. "We expected battles with your fleet. We expected to win those battles and force your government to surrender. That is how war works." "That is how war works for you," Jacob corrected. "But not for us." Lisa brought up new images. These showed human cities under attack, factories working day and night, people lining up to volunteer, children helping build equipment, old people growing food, every single person doing something to help the war effort. "When you attacked us, you were not just fighting our military," Lisa said. "You were fighting every single human being alive. Our soldiers, yes, but also our factory workers, our farmers, our doctors, our teachers. Everyone became part of the war machine." She showed footage from the war. Human cargo ships being converted into military vessels. Civilian mining operations being turned into weapons production. Sports stadiums becoming training centers. "We call it total war," Lisa continued. "Every resource, every person, every piece of technology we had was focused on one goal: survival. Your empire had never faced anything like it. Vex Theron shifted uncomfortably. The Zetharian military is strong. Our warrior caste trains from birth to fight. Yes, Paul said. And that is a weakness, not a strength. The alien commander bristled. How dare you? Let me explain, Paul said calmly. Your warrior caste fights your wars. But what about the rest of your people? What were they doing while the war was happening? Vex Theron paused. They continued their normal lives. They worked their jobs. They raised their children. The war was not their concern. Exactly, Jacob said. And when your warriors started losing, your people did not understand. They did not feel the urgency. They did not sacrifice anything. To most Zetharians, the war was something happening far away. He brought up a chart showing resource allocation during the war. Look at this. In the first year of the war, the Zetharian Empire devoted about 20% of its industrial capacity to the military. That number grew to 30% in year 2. By year 3, you had reached 40%, and your civilian population was starting to complain about shortages. Then he showed the human numbers. In the first 6 months after you attacked Earth, humanity converted 80% of all industry to war production. By the end of year 1, it was 95%. We stopped making cars. We stopped making luxury goods. We stopped making anything that did not help us fight. Vex Theron stared at the numbers. That is impossible. Your economy would collapse. It almost did, Jacob admitted. People struggled. There were food shortages, power rationing, fuel restrictions. Life became very hard for everyone. But do you know what happened? People accepted it. They understood why it was necessary. Because every human knew that if we lost, there would be no economy left at all. There would be nothing left. Lisa showed images of human families during the war. Parents working double shifts in factories, teenagers learning to operate machinery, children collecting scrap metal to be recycled into ships. This is what you faced, she said. Not just an army. An entire species that had decided to survive no matter what the cost. Paul brought up historical records from Earth. We have been fighting each other for thousands of years. Humans against humans. Wars where both sides were equally matched. Wars where victory was never certain. We learned hard lessons from those conflicts. He showed battles from human history. Ancient armies clashing with swords. Medieval sieges lasting for years. World wars that consumed entire continents. We learned that wars are not won by having the best soldiers. Wars are won by the side that is willing to pay the highest price. The side that refuses to quit. The side that keeps fighting even when defeat seems certain. Vex Theron was quiet for a long moment. You are saying that your species is more willing to die than mine. No, Jacob said firmly. We are saying that we are more willing to sacrifice than your species. There is a difference. I do not see a difference, Vex Theron replied. Then let me show you, Jacob said. He brought up casualty reports from several battles. The Battle of Luna. Your fleet engaged our defense force. You had 12 ships. We had 7. By your military doctrine, you should have won easily. But you had those defense platforms, Vex Theron said, hidden in the asteroid field. Yes, we did, Jacob agreed. But even with those, the battle was close. Your commanders retreated when they had lost 4 ships, 33% casualties. In your military tradition, that is an acceptable point to withdraw. He highlighted the human casualties. We lost 5 of our 7 ships, over 70% casualties. But we kept fighting, because Luna had 3 million civilians who needed to be evacuated. If we had retreated, your remaining ships would have bombarded the colony. Vex Theron said nothing. Your commanders made a logical decision, Jacob continued. Losing 4 ships hurt, but they could retreat and fight another day. Our commanders made a different calculation. They calculated that saving 3 million people was worth losing 5 ships and 3,000 crew members. Lisa leaned forward. This happened in battle after battle. Your forces would win the early stages of the fight. Then you would start taking casualties. At a certain point, your commanders would make the logical choice to retreat. But our commanders never retreated. They fought until they won or until they were destroyed. That is madness, Vex Theron said quietly. Maybe, Jacob replied. But it is effective madness. Your military could never predict what we would do, because we did not follow logical patterns. We followed human patterns, and those patterns were shaped by millions of years of survival against impossible odds. The holographic display faded. The room was quiet again except for the hum of the station. Vexatheron looked at the three humans across from him. He was beginning to understand something that frightened him more than any weapon could. Jacob activated the holographic display again. This time it showed a single human ship. The name along its hull read, Defiant. "I want to tell you about Captain Ryan Blake," Jacob said. His voice carried a weight that made even Vexatheron pay closer attention. His story explained something important about how humans fight. The display showed Ryan Blake. He was a young man with short brown hair and an easy smile. He looked like someone who should be teaching children or working in a shop, not commanding a warship. Ryan was 32 years old when the war started. Jacob continued. He had a wife named Claire and a daughter named Sophie. Sophie was only 4 years old. Ryan did not want to leave them. But when the Zetharian Empire attacked, he volunteered immediately. Lisa took over the story. Ryan commanded a light cruiser. The Defiant was not a powerful ship. It was designed for patrol work and escort duties. But when the war began, every ship was needed. Ryan and his crew of 400 were sent to defend the Proxima system. The holographic display shifted. It showed a star map with colored markers representing ships. Blue for humans, red for Zetharians. The Battle of Proxima happened in month 8 of the war, Lisa explained. Your empire was pushing hard into human territory. You wanted to secure the system because it had 3 colonies and important mining operations. I remember this battle, Vexatheron said. His voice was cold. We sent a strike force of 15 ships. You only had 7 defenders. That is correct, Lisa confirmed. The human fleet was badly outnumbered. The battle did not go well. Within 2 hours, 3 human ships were destroyed. The others were damaged and running low on ammunition. The display showed the battle playing out. Red markers surrounded and overwhelmed blue ones. Captain Blake's ship was hit multiple times, Lisa continued. His engines were damaged, his weapons were almost empty. He was ordered to retreat with the other surviving ships. Paul brought up Ryan's service record. Ryan was known for following orders. He was a by-the-book officer. His superiors trusted him because he always did exactly what he was told. But this time, he did not retreat, Jacob said quietly. The display zoomed in on the Defiant. It showed the ship changing course. Instead of moving away from the Zetharian fleet, it was moving toward them. Ryan studied the battle situation, Lisa explained. He saw that the Zetharian ships were being coordinated by a flagship, the carrier called Wrath of Zethara. It was staying back from the fighting, directing the other ships like a conductor leading an orchestra. Vexatheron's eyes widened slightly. He remembered the Wrath of Zethara. It had been a powerful ship, one of the finest in the fleet. Ryan realized something, Jacob said. If that flagship was destroyed, the entire Zetharian formation would fall into chaos. Your ships would lose their coordination. They would become confused. It might buy enough time for the colonies to evacuate. So he attacked the flagship with 1 damaged cruiser? Vexatheron asked. There was disbelief in his voice. That is suicide. Yes, Jacob agreed. It was. The holographic display showed what happened next. The Defiant accelerated. It dodged fire from several Zetharian ships. It was hit again and again. Pieces of the ship broke away. Explosions tore through its hull. Ryan redirected all power to the engines, Lisa said. He shut down weapons, life support, everything. The ship became a missile traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. Your point defense systems tried to stop it, Paul added. You destroyed most of the ship before it reached the Wrath of Zethara, but enough mass remained. Enough velocity remained. The display showed the impact. The Defiant, or what was left of it, struck the Zetharian flagship. The explosion was massive. It lit up space like a small sun. 400 human crew members died in that attack, Jacob said. His voice was heavy. Captain Ryan Blake died. He never saw his daughter grow up. He never got to grow old with his wife. He gave up everything he had and everything he would ever have. For what? Vexatheron demanded. For 1 ship? Your captain traded 400 lives for 1 Zetharian vessel? No, Lisa corrected. He traded 400 lives for time. The destruction of your flagship disrupted the entire attack. Your ships fell back to regroup. That gave the colonies enough time to evacuate. 2 million people got away safely. People who would have died if Ryan had followed orders and retreated. She brought up casualty reports and evacuation records. Do the math, Commander. 400 lives for 2 million lives. By human calculation, that is a trade worth making. Vex Theron was silent. He stared at the display showing the explosion over and over again. This was not an isolated incident, Jacob said. He brought up more records, more ships, more captains, more battles where humans had done the impossible. Captain Karen Wells commanded the defense of New Haven Colony. When your fleet arrived, she had a choice. Surrender and save the 2 million colonists, or destroy the antimatter production facilities and deny you critical resources. The display showed Karen Wells. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. Karen chose to destroy the facilities, Jacob continued. She knew it meant everyone on the planet would die. The explosion would kill them all. But she also knew that those facilities would have allowed your empire to build 50 new ships. Ships that would attack other human colonies, kill other humans. She murdered 2 million of her own people, Vex Theron said. There was horror in his voice. No, Paul corrected gently. She saved 20 million people on other worlds. That is how she saw it. That is how humanity saw it. We do not call her a murderer. We call her a hero. There is a memorial on Earth with her name. 2 million names are carved into that memorial. People visit it every day. They remember the sacrifice. Jacob stood and walked to the window again. He looked out at the stars. You asked me what secret weapon we had, he said. This is it. Not better technology, not stronger ships, but the willingness to make calculations that your people cannot understand. The willingness to sacrifice a few to save many. The willingness to die so that others can live. You are describing a species of fanatics, Vex Theron said, but his voice was uncertain now. Perhaps, Jacob replied. Or perhaps we are just a species that understands math. 400 for 2 million. 2 million for 20 million. The numbers are clear. Lisa brought up statistics from throughout the war. In 73 separate engagements, human commanders chose to sacrifice their ships and crews to achieve strategic objectives. 73 times we did what your tactical computers said was impossible, what your commanders would never do. And it worked, Paul added. Battle after battle, your forces were confused by our actions. Your commanders could not predict what we would do, because we did not follow the rules you thought war had. Vex Theron looked at each of the humans. You are monsters, he said quietly. Maybe, Jacob said again. But we are monsters who won. We are monsters who saved our species from extinction. We are monsters who did what was necessary. He returned to his seat and looked directly at Vex Theron. Your empire fights wars to conquer, to expand, to gain territory and resources. You can afford to retreat because there is always another battle, another day. But we were fighting for survival. There was no retreat, no second chance. If we lost, humanity would be enslaved or destroyed. So we made choices that seemed insane to you, choices that went against every military tradition you had. And those choices won you the war, Vex Theron said. It was not a question. Yes, Jacob confirmed. Those choices won us the war, because, while your commanders were calculating acceptable losses and strategic retreats, our commanders were calculating how to win at any cost, and in the end, your empire could not match our willingness to pay that cost. The room was quiet again. Outside the window, the debris field continued its slow drift through space. Among those pieces of metal and plastic were the remains of the Defiant, the remains of 400 people who chose to die so others could live. Vex Theron understood now. He understood why his empire had lost, and the understanding was more terrifying than any defeat in battle could ever be. Paul Martinez cleared his throat and brought up new images on the holographic display. These were different from before. They showed paintings, sculptures, and ancient texts. Now I want to talk about something else, Paul said. Something that might seem strange to discuss in a military context. I want to talk about culture. Vex Theron looked confused. What does culture have to do with war? Everything, Paul replied. He brought up an image of an old book. The pages were yellow with age. This is called the Iliad. It was written by a human named Homer almost 3,000 years ago. Long before we had spaceflight. Long before we even had machines. What is it about? Vex Theron asked. War, Paul said simply. It tells the story of a war that happened even longer ago. A war between two cities. The book describes battles, heroes, victories, and defeats. It talks about honor and sacrifice and the cost of fighting. He brought up more texts, more images. Books and scrolls and tablets from different times and places. This is called The Art of War, written by a Chinese general named Sun Tzu about 2,500 years ago. This one is called On War, written by a Prussian soldier named Karl about 200 years ago. This is the Battle of Hastings, fought 900 years ago. This is Gettysburg, fought 300 years ago. The images kept coming. Paintings of battles, monuments to soldiers, statues of generals, memorials to the dead. Humanity has been fighting wars since before we had writing, Paul explained. And we have been remembering those wars just as long. Every culture on Earth has stories about battles, songs about warriors, poems about sacrifice. We do not just fight wars. We remember them. We study them. We learn from them. Lisa took over. When a young Zetharian warrior enters military training, what does he learn? Vex Theron thought for a moment. He learns combat techniques, weapon systems, tactics, command structure. And does he learn about battles from your history? Lisa asked. We review some campaigns, Vex Theron said. Successful conquests. Examples of proper military procedure. But do you study your failures? Lisa pressed. Do you analyze battles you lost? Do you examine mistakes made by commanders? Vex Theron hesitated. Failure is not something to celebrate. We focus on success. And that is another difference between us, Lisa said. She brought up a human military academy. When our soldiers train, they study hundreds of battles, victories and defeats. They learn what worked and what failed. They study commanders who made brilliant decisions and commanders who made terrible mistakes. Paul showed images of human military history classes. Every human officer can tell you about famous defeats. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 soldiers held off an army. The Alamo, where fewer than 200 defenders fought thousands. Stalingrad, where an entire city became a battlefield for months. These are defeats, Vex Theron pointed out. Why celebrate them? We do not celebrate the defeat, Jacob explained. We honor the lesson. We remember what was learned. At Thermopylae, we learned that terrain and determination can offset numbers. At the Alamo, we learned about buying time with sacrifice. At Stalingrad, we learned that civilians can become soldiers when survival is at stake. Lisa brought up training records. Every human soldier, from the lowest private to the highest admiral, spends years studying military history. Not just human history. We study every species we encounter. We analyze their tactics, their strategies, their successes and failures. When we first met the Zetharian Empire, Paul said, we immediately began studying your military campaigns. We reviewed every battle you had fought for the last 200 years. We analyzed your patterns, your tactics, your doctrine. He brought up charts and graphs. We found consistent patterns. Your forces always attacked in standard formations. Your commanders always retreated at 30% casualties. Your supply lines always followed predictable routes. You had not changed your basic strategy in generations. Our methods have been successful, Vex Theron said defensively. We have conquered 40 systems. Yes, Jacob agreed. Against species who had never studied warfare the way we have. Species who did not have thousands of years of military tradition, but when you faced humanity, you were facing a species that has made war into an art form. The display changed again. Now it showed a young soldier. His name tag read Cooper. This is Lieutenant Sam Cooper, Jacob said. He volunteered to come to this meeting. Sam, would you join us? A door at the side of the room opened. Sam Cooper walked in. He was a young man, perhaps 25 years old. His left arm ended at the elbow in a mechanical prosthetic. Scars crossed his face and disappeared under his uniform collar. Sam walked to the table and nodded to Vex Theron. Commander, Vex Theron stared at the young human. You fought in the ground war. Yes, sir, Sam replied. I was part of the defense of Titan Colony. I fought your soldiers for 3 months in the underground tunnels. Then you know how well Zetharian warriors fight, Vexatherin said. There was pride in his voice. I do, Sam agreed. Your soldiers are strong, fast, well-trained in hand-to-hand combat. Their weapons are excellent. In a fair fight, one Zetharian warrior can defeat 3 human soldiers. Yet you won the battle for Titan, Vexatherin said. Yes, sir, Sam replied. Because we did not fight fair. He gestured to the holographic display. Lisa brought up maps of the Titan tunnel system. Your soldiers were trained to fight in formation, Sam explained. They moved through the tunnels in organized groups. They communicated constantly with their commanders. When they received orders, they followed them exactly. That is proper military discipline, Vexatherin said. Yes, sir, Sam agreed. But we did not fight that way. We broke into small groups. 2 or 3 soldiers working together. No formation. No constant communication. Each group operated independently. He pointed to different locations on the map. We set ambushes here, here, and here. We attacked and then disappeared. We made noise in one tunnel to draw your soldiers there, then attacked from a different direction. We booby-trapped corridors. We collapsed tunnels behind us. We fought dirty. You fought without honor, Vexatherin said. We fought to win, Sam corrected. Honor does not matter when you are trying to save 300,000 civilians. Jacob stood and walked over to Sam. He put a hand on the young man's shoulder. Sam lost his arm when a tunnel collapsed. He was trapped for 4 hours before we could dig him out. But do you know what he did during those 4 hours? Vexatherin shook his head. He kept fighting, Jacob said. There was a radio near him. He used it to coordinate other squads, to warn them about Zetharian positions, to guide rescue teams to wounded soldiers. He lost his arm, but he saved 20 lives that day. Sam looked uncomfortable with the praise. I was just doing my job. That is the point, Lisa said. Every human soldier is taught to think independently, to adapt, to continue the mission even when cut off from command. Your soldiers followed orders. Ours followed objectives. Paul brought up more data. The Battle of Titan lasted 3 months. Your forces had superior numbers, superior weapons, superior warriors, but you lost because you could not adapt to how we fought. You kept expecting us to form battle lines and fight directly. We never did. We were not trained for that kind of war, Vexatherin admitted. No, Jacob said, because your training focuses on perfection, on following the proper procedures, on doing things the correct way. Our training focuses on accomplishing the mission by any means necessary. He walked back to his seat. We teach our soldiers to be flexible, to break rules when needed, to ignore orders if they have better information. We teach them that the mission matters more than regulations. That sounds like chaos, Vexatherin said. It is controlled chaos, Lisa replied. It works because every soldier understands the ultimate objective. Not just their orders, but why those orders were given, what we are trying to achieve. Sam spoke up again. In the tunnels of Titan, I lost contact with my superiors for 2 weeks. The communication equipment was destroyed. But I knew what needed to be done. Protect the civilians, delay the enemy, so I kept fighting. I did not need someone to tell me what to do every moment. And there were thousands like him, Jacob added, soldiers who fought for days without orders, who made their own decisions, who adapted to situations as they developed. Your military had never faced anything like that. Paul brought up a final image. It showed a memorial on Earth, thousands of names carved into black stone. This is our memorial to the fallen, he said quietly. Every person who died in the war has their name here. Soldiers and civilians, officers and enlisted, everyone who gave their life for humanity. We have similar memorials, Vexatherin said. Do you? Paul asked. Do Zetharian civilians visit them? Do parents bring their children to teach them about sacrifice? Do artists write songs and paint pictures about those who died? Vexatherin said nothing. I thought not, Paul said. Because for you, war is something the warrior caste does. For us, war is something our entire species experiences. We remember it. We honor it. We learn from it. And we make absolutely certain we never forget the cost. Sam nodded to everyone and left the room. Vexatherin watched him go. The young human with his mechanical arm and scarred face. A warrior who had fought without honor, without following proper military procedures, without even having orders for weeks. A warrior who had... The conference room had grown darker. The station's lighting had adjusted to simulate evening. Vextheron had been sitting with the humans for hours now. His mind was struggling to process everything he had learned. Jacob stood and walked to the window one more time. He looked out at the debris field, his reflection ghostly in the transparent material. "Commander," Jacob said without turning around, "I have one question for you. One question that goes to the heart of everything we have been discussing." "Ask it," Vextheron replied. Jacob turned to face him. "How do you fight an enemy that does not fear death?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Vextheron opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. He had no answer, not one that made sense. "You cannot," Jacob said, answering his own question. "You cannot fight such an enemy using conventional warfare. Because every tactic, every strategy, every military doctrine is built on the assumption that both sides want to survive, that both sides will make rational decisions to preserve their forces." He walked back to the table slowly. When one side stops caring about survival, the entire equation changes. And your empire never understood that. Lisa activated the holographic display one final time. It showed economic data, charts and graphs filled with numbers. "Let me show you something else," she said. "Something about how wars are really won, not on battlefields but in factories and farms and homes." The display showed the Zetharian Empire's production capacity during the war. Ships built, weapons manufactured, resources consumed. "In the first year of the war, your empire built 300 new warships," Lisa explained. "That was an impressive effort. You increased production by 40% over peacetime levels." Then she showed human production numbers. "We built 800 ships in the first year, and 1,200 in the second year. By the third year, we were building 2,000 ships annually." "Impossible," Vextheron said. "Your industrial capacity was smaller than ours at the start of the war." "Yes," Lisa agreed. "But we did something you never considered. We converted everything. Every factory that made civilian goods became a military factory. Every shipyard that built cargo vessels started building warships. Every resource extraction operation was directed toward the war effort." Paul brought up more data. "Your empire kept 70% of its economy running normally during the war. Your people still bought luxury goods, still took vacations, still lived comfortable lives. The war was something happening far away. For humans," Lisa continued, "the war was everything. We stopped producing cars. We stopped making entertainment devices. We stopped building new homes. Every single resource went to the war." "But your people must have suffered," Vextheron said. "They did," Jacob confirmed. "Life became very hard. Food was rationed. Power was limited. Everyone worked long hours. Children went to bed hungry sometimes. Old people could not heat their homes properly." He looked directly at Vextheron. "And do you know what happened?" "People accepted it. They understood why. Because losing the war meant losing everything. Not just comfort, not just prosperity, everything. Our freedom, our future, our lives." Lisa showed images from human cities during the war. Long lines of people waiting for food rations. Families huddled in cold apartments. Children working in factories alongside adults. "This is what total war looks like," she said. "This is what happens when an entire species mobilizes. And your empire could never match it, could never even comprehend it." Paul added more context. "The Zetharian economy began to strain in year 2 of the war. Your civilian population was complaining about shortages. Your politicians were arguing about the cost. Some were even calling for peace negotiations." "I remember," Vextheron said quietly. "The council was divided. Many thought the war was too expensive." "Exactly," Paul said. "Because your empire fights wars to gain things. Territory, resources, prestige. But when the cost becomes too high, you stop. You negotiate. You accept a compromise." Jacob leaned forward. "Humanity was not fighting to gain anything. We were fighting to not lose everything. There is no price too high when extinction is the alternative." The holographic display changed again. This time it showed casualty figures. "Over the course of the war," Lisa said, "the Zetharian Empire lost approximately 2 million military personnel. That represents about 30% of your warrior caste. When casualties reached that level, your council ordered a ceasefire. They decided the cost was too high." She showed human casualties next. The numbers were staggering. Humanity lost 15 million people, military and civilian combined. That is almost 1% of our total population. And you know what our government did when casualties reached that level? Vex Theron shook his head. Nothing, Jacob said. We kept fighting. We did not consider surrender. Did not consider negotiation. Because the math was simple. 1% lost meant 99% still alive. Still fighting! Still able to win. Your species is insane, Vex Theron said. But there was no strength in his words now. Only a kind of horrified understanding. Perhaps, Jacob agreed. Or perhaps we simply understand something your species never learned. When survival is at stake, there is no cost too high, no sacrifice too great, no loss unacceptable. Paul brought up strategic analyses from the war. Your military commanders could not predict human actions because they kept using standard military models. Models that assume rational behavior. Models that assume both sides will try to minimize casualties. But we were not rational by your standards, Lisa said. We attacked when we should have retreated. We sacrificed ships to achieve minor objectives. We turned defeats into victories through sheer refusal to accept loss. She showed battle after battle where human forces had done the unexpected, the impossible. Look at the Battle of Io. Your fleet had complete superiority. You should have won in hours. But we sent wave after wave of ships against you. We lost 60 ships. You lost 15. But we held Io long enough to evacuate the mining stations, the Battle of Europa. We had no chance of victory, so we did not try to win. We tried to inflict maximum damage before being destroyed. Your fleet lost 20 ships. It took you 3 months to repair and refit. The Siege of Mars. Your ground forces surrounded our positions. We could not escape, could not win. So we made you pay for every meter of ground, every building, every street. The battle lasted 8 months. Your casualties were enormous. Jacob stood and began pacing. Each battle you won tactically, but strategically you were bleeding. Your economy was straining. Your warrior caste was being depleted. Your civilian population was losing faith in the war. Meanwhile, Lisa added, humanity was getting stronger. Our production was increasing. Our tactics were improving. Our people were more united than ever. Paul brought up economic projections. We ran the numbers, Commander. Even if you had won every single battle, even if you had occupied Earth itself, the occupation would have bankrupted your empire within 20 years. He showed detailed analysis. Resistance movements, insurgency costs, garrison requirements, resource expenditure. We would never have stopped fighting, Paul explained. Every occupied world would have required massive forces to control. Every city would have been a battleground. Every human would have been a potential enemy. The cost would have been endless. Vex Theron stared at the numbers. He could see it now. See the truth. His empire had lost before the first shot was fired. They had lost because they were fighting an enemy that could not be conquered, could not be broken, could not be made to surrender. You want to know our secret weapon? Jacob asked. It was not technology, not tactics, not strategy. It was this. The absolute certainty that we would rather die than submit. Every single human knew this, believed this, lived this. He pointed to the debris field outside. Every piece of wreckage out there represents that certainty. Every ship that was destroyed, every soldier who died, every civilian who sacrificed. They all chose death over defeat. And you cannot fight that, Lisa said. You can win battles against it. You can destroy ships and kill soldiers. But you cannot break it. Because it is not a military force. It is a fundamental aspect of who we are. Paul closed the data displays. This is why you lost, Commander. Not because we were stronger, not because we were smarter, but because we were willing to pay a price that your empire could never match. The room fell silent. Vex Theron sat very still. His world, his understanding of warfare, of power, of empire had been completely shattered. Finally, he spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. What now? Jacob returned to his seat. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than before. Now we make peace. Real peace. Not the peace of the conquered and the conqueror, but the peace of two species who understand each other. He pulled out a data pad. The treaty we are asking you to sign is harsh. I will not pretend otherwise. Your empire will lose territory. We'll pay reparations. We'll limit your military. But, he continued, we are not trying to destroy you. We are trying to teach you something. The same thing we had to learn through thousands of years of warfare. What is that? Vex Theron asked. That peace is cheaper than war, Jacob said simply. That cooperation provides more benefit than conquest. That making friends is smarter than making enemies. Lisa added, "We told you all of this not to humiliate you, but to help you understand." Vextheron reached out with a scaled hand toward the datapad containing the treaty. His fingers hovered over it for a long moment. The silence in the room was absolute. "Before I sign," he said slowly, "I need to understand one more thing." Jacob nodded. "Ask." "You say your people were willing to die rather than submit. That every human accepted this. But surely there were some who wanted to surrender. Some who thought peace at any price was better than fighting." It was a good question. An intelligent question. Jacob exchanged glances with Lisa and Paul before answering. "Yes," Jacob admitted. "There were some. In the early days of the war, there were protests. People marching in the streets calling for peace. Politicians arguing that we should negotiate. Entire movements dedicated to ending the fighting. What happened to them?" Vextheron asked. "Nothing," Jacob said. "They were allowed to protest. To speak, to argue their position. Because that is what freedom means. The freedom to disagree." Lisa brought up images on the holographic display. Crowds of humans holding signs. Speeches being given. Debates in government chambers. But something interesting happened as the war continued, Lisa explained. As people saw what the Zetharian Empire did to occupied worlds. As they heard stories from refugees. As they understood what surrender would actually mean. Those peace movements got smaller. Paul added context. When your forces occupied the colony of New Terra, you implemented standard Zetharian rule. The human population was divided into work groups. Their freedom was restricted. They were made to serve the Empire. That is how occupation works, Vextheron said. We were not cruel. We provided food and shelter. We maintained order. You provided slavery, Jacob corrected. You took free people and made them subjects. And when news of that reached other human worlds, the peace movements disappeared almost overnight. He stood and walked to the window again. It seemed to be a habit of his, looking out at the stars while he spoke. Humans can debate whether to fight a war, can argue about strategy and tactics, can disagree about the cost, but show us slavery, show us oppression, show us what we will become if we lose, and the debate ends. Because there are some things worse than death. Lisa showed more data, public opinion polls from throughout the war. In the first month after your attack, 62% of humans supported continuing the war. 25% wanted peace negotiations. 13% were undecided. By month 6 after New Terra was occupied, the numbers had changed. 94% supported the war. 3% wanted peace. 3% undecided. And by year 2, Paul continued, it was 98%. The entire species had unified behind a single goal. Survival, freedom, victory. Vextheron absorbed this information. So you are saying that we helped create our own defeat by showing you what occupation meant? Yes, Jacob confirmed. If you had left our worlds alone after initial conquest, if you had allowed local government to continue, if you had been less heavy-handed, maybe the peace movements would have grown. Maybe humanity would have fractured. Maybe we would have negotiated. But you did not, Lisa said. You implemented standard imperial policy, and that policy united us against you more effectively than any speech or propaganda ever could. There was a knock at the door. Jacob called out permission to enter. A young woman in a service uniform came in carrying a tray with cups and a pot of some steaming liquid. I thought everyone might want something to drink, she said quietly. She set the tray on the table and left. Jacob poured the liquid into cups. Coffee, he explained. A human beverage. I do not know if your biology can process it safely. Vextheron took a cup anyway. He studied the dark liquid. Tell me something, Admiral Hayes. When you look back at this war, what do you feel? Jacob was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of emotion that had been absent before. Sadness, he said. Grief for the 15 million who died. Relief that it is over. Pride in what we accomplished. But mostly I feel tired. He sat down heavily in his chair. I am 63 years old, Commander. I have spent the last 3 years sending people to die. Young people. People with families. People with dreams and futures. I sent them to die because it was necessary. Because the alternative was worse. But that does not make it easy. Lisa spoke up. I lost my brother in the war. He was a pilot. His ship was destroyed in the Battle of Saturn. He was 24 years old. He wanted to be a teacher when the war ended. He will never get that chance. Paul's voice was soft. My daughter was on Mars during the siege. She survived, but she saw things that no child should see. She is 12 years old and she has nightmares every night. Jacob looked at Vexatheron with eyes that had seen too much. This is what war costs, Commander. Not just ships and resources. People, lives, futures. Even in victory, we lose something we can never get back. Then why fight? Vexatheron asked. If the cost is so high, why not seek peace? Because the cost of not fighting would have been higher, Jacob replied. That is the calculation we made. That is the choice every human made. We chose the lesser evil. He pushed the coffee cup across the table toward Vexatheron. But now the war is over. Now we can choose something better. We can choose to build instead of destroy, to create instead of kill, to make sure that what we sacrificed was not wasted. Vexatheron picked up the treaty data pad. He read through it carefully. The terms were indeed harsh. Territory returned. Reparations paid. Military restrictions imposed. But as he read, he began to see something else. Provisions for trade, cultural exchange programs, joint scientific research, the framework for a future relationship. You are not just dictating terms, he said. You are offering partnership. Yes, Jacob confirmed. Because we understand something that your empire never learned. Today's enemy can be tomorrow's friend, but only if we choose to make it so. Lisa stood and walked around the table. She stood beside Vexatheron and pointed to specific clauses in the treaty. Look at these sections. We are proposing joint patrol zones, shared intelligence about pirate activity, cooperation on asteroid mining rights. These are not the terms of conqueror to conquered. These are the terms of equals. But we are not equals, Vexatheron said. You defeated us. You proved you are stronger. We proved we were more desperate, Paul corrected. There is a difference. In a war of survival, humanity will do anything. Pay any price. Make any sacrifice. But in peace, we can be reasonable. Generous even, because we do not need to prove anything anymore. Jacob stood and extended his hand across the table. Sign the treaty, Commander. Help us build something better than what came before. Help us make sure that all those deaths meant something. Vexatheron looked at the offered hand. In Zetharian culture, such a gesture had different meaning. But he understood what the human was offering. Trust, partnership, a new beginning. He took Jacob's hand. The human's grip was firm but not aggressive. Not a warrior's grip. A diplomat's grip, I will sign, Vexatheron said, and I will bring this knowledge back to my people. They will not believe it at first. They will think I am making excuses for failure, but I will make them understand. He picked up the stylus and pressed it to the datapad. His signature appeared in glowing letters. The treaty was sealed. What happens now? Vexatheron asked. Now we both go home, Jacob said. You to your empire, me to Earth. We tell our people that the war is over. We start the long process of healing, of rebuilding, of learning to trust again. Lisa deactivated the holographic display. It will not be easy. There is too much hurt, too much anger, too many dead, but it is possible. Paul gathered his data pads. In time, Zetharians and humans may become friends. Our children may grow up in a galaxy where this war is just history. A story told to teach lessons, a warning about the cost of conflict. Jacob walked Vexatheron to the door. There is one more thing you should know, Commander. One more piece of the puzzle. What is that? Vexatheron asked. We did not just fight to survive, Jacob said. We fought for the right to choose our own future. To be free, to live as we want to live. That is what every human who died was fighting for. Not for revenge. Not for conquest. For freedom. He opened the door. And now we are offering you the same thing. The freedom to choose what your empire becomes. The freedom to learn from this defeat. The freedom to build something better. Vexatheron stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he turned back to face the three humans. Thank you, he said, simple words but filled with meaning. Thank you for being honest. For explaining. For not just defeating us, but teaching us. Thank you for listening, Jacob replied, and for having the courage to ask the hard questions. Not every defeated commander would do that. Vexatheron left the room. The door closed behind him. Jacob, Lisa, and Paul stood in silence for a long moment. Do you think they will learn? Lisa asked quietly. I hope so, Jacob replied. Because if they do not, if they come back for another war, we will have to defeat them again. And next time the cost may be too high even for us. But you gave them a chance, Paul said. That is more than most victors would do. Jacob walked to the window one last time. He looked out at the debris field. All those broken ships, all those dead, human and Zetharian alike. The galaxy is watching, he said, watching to see what humanity does with victory. If we act like conquerors, we become what we